Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to Michael and Simon there. Now that we've discussed the mistakes and we've discussed the state of play and Spendesk's exciting journey as well, we're back to look at the future and how data is going to revolutionize the payment space going forwards. So obviously data, well, payments and digitization have been on a really fast-paced journey, and 2020 was a year like no other when it came to innovation. We saw things increase even more. So we're going to look at the potential that data has to really help payments businesses and the ecosystem strengthen relationships, fill product gaps, and boost collaboration as well. So I'm joined by Jonathan here from Pollinate and Peter from BPC and Radar Payments. And I'd just like to start by kind of introducing you both and telling us kind of what your business does and why data sits at the core of it. So Peter, I'll start with you since you're at the top of the screen.
Okay, thank you. My name is Peter Theunis. I am CEO for Radar Payments, which is an internal venture of BPC Group. Radar Payments is what we call a white label processor. So we process payments on behalf of banks and fintechs in acquiring of payments or issuing of cards. And data in us is of course very important because we are getting into this world where knowledge and the value of data becomes very expensive. In this way, if you know what the patterns are from your customers, then you know how to serve your customers better and to know how to lead them to better products. So in that perspective, data, even if it is about payments, is very important.
Excellent. And Jonathan, what about Pollinate and where data sits within that?
Thanks, Livia. Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Hughes. I'm one of the co-founders of Pollinate. Pollinate works primarily with banks to help them innovate in their payment businesses. So unlike Peter's platform, we don't actually manage or route the payment itself, but we provide banks with a digital platform that wraps around that payment technology and then enables them to provide a whole bunch of data services, integration services to their merchants. So we like to say we're a B2B to B to C company. I think we like to say that because we like to make things complicated. But you know, our customers are the banks, which is the second B. Their customers are merchants, which is the third B, and their customers are consumers. And so as we think about what we're trying to do with data, we're trying to help the banks give their merchant customers data insights, which in most cases, the most valuable of those are about their customers. So the sort of data insights that we're aiming to serve up to a bank's merchants through our portal, through our analytics, are things like insights into their customer behavior. So things like who are their most valuable customers, who are their returning customers versus customers they might only see once. And you can do that from looking at the card and the transaction data. What are the patterns of businesses? When are they busy? When are they not busy? How does that compare? How does this Saturday compare to last Saturday? And so it's a lot of data insight that we're trying to give to merchants to help them grow and manage their businesses.
Thank you both. You're both very welcome. And of course, if you guys have any questions for Peter or Jonathan, please pop them in the chat and we'll try and get through to those as well. Now, on the last panel, we asked the panelists what they wish banks understood and knew about data. And unfortunately, we didn't have all night to go into that, but there were a few obviously interesting answers there. And this is interesting because incumbent banks, they have access to huge amounts of data and they've built up relationships with customers, often over decades. But are they currently making the most of this is what I want to ask both of you. And if not, why not? So Peter, I'll come to you first on that.
Okay. In data, there are two split ups into my idea. First of all, data gives you the opportunity to reduce risk because fraud these days, and for sure now in these COVID times, you have much more online commerce. So the more data you have, the more you can study this data, the patterns of this data, and you can improve your defense versus attackers. And I don't know if you all hear the same robotic sound.
Sorry, yeah, we've a bit of interference.
Yeah.
We'll try and mute ourselves when we're not talking, I think. There we go.
So to give you an idea, in our company, we have a fraud solution, and over the last 12 months, we implemented another number of AI mechanisms. And now we going into 99.999% of avoiding fraud, which was a very big increase in what I had before. So first of all, using data can reduce risk. The second part is about improve revenue. And that's what, of course, everybody wants. And that is about understanding better the transactional behavior, understanding better why transactions are declined, because it's not only about approved transactions, it's about increasing the number of approved transactions and decrease the number of declines. It is about how many transactions happen on a certain device, on a certain location. What do people buy? Because whatever people think today, if the data goes over the international payment schemes, there is quite a good idea what's happening in these stores. So using this data, you can even increase revenue or improve revenue and reduce risk. Today, traditional banks are not, to my idea, using this opportunity enough. They are much more defensive. They're always, and if you talk for Europe, scared about GDPR and things like that, but it is not even about a specific person, but it is about customer behavior. And customer behavior you can also do on an anonymous scale. So all of this, I see that banks traditional banks have a huge way to go in that. And let's hope that they come out of their comfort zone and start to enable this kind of mechanism.
Brilliant. Jonathan, when it comes to those two factors Peter's mentioned, revenue and risk, do you think that banks are doing enough with data, or what would you like to see in the future?
I think banks are having, and to be fair to banks are having exactly the same problems with data as pretty much everyone else is. And that is that there's still a huge gap between what I think is a data insight, or more often what an algorithm thinks is a data insight, and actually what's interesting to me, either as a consumer or as a merchant. So in the world of open banking, because we're sort of 5 or 6 minutes in, and someone needed to mention open banking, but every UK bank at the moment is trying to give me insights in my banking apps, and I look at them, and they're what I've spent this month and how much more it is than what I earned. It's kind of where I've spent. It's trying to give me a breakdown between shopping and groceries, and I'm not interested in any of it. So the banks are trying to tell me about me. I don't need them to tell me about me. I want them to tell me about things I'm interested in. And look, again, to be fair to banks, I think pretty much everybody who is trying to deliver insights to their customers is wrestling with this. So when we started doing merchant insight, we did a ton of work, and we were really excited by all the stuff that we came up with that we could tell merchants. And we went out and we tested it with merchants, and 80% of it they weren't interested in, or it just wasn't accurate enough. So to give you a couple of examples, if I run a shop and my sales are 20% down because it rained on a Saturday, I don't need the data to tell me that. I know that I'm 20% down because it rained on a Saturday. Now, if I can really analyze that data and say, this is what's happened in the long term on Saturdays, this is what's happened on Saturdays at different times, this is how it correlates with weather, and this is how it correlates with whether or not the football ground round the corner from you has a match on, then you can start to get to something. But that's incredibly complicated. And actually, by the time you've done that analysis, you're probably still not adding much value. Another example is, if I'm running a bar, I might have a completely different group of customers who come in at Saturday lunchtime than if I do on the Saturday evening. So again, just trying to tell me something about customers, about my customers on a Saturday, that I'm not interested. And so it sounds very harsh, but it's a huge challenge, because if you can't give people something that they say, oh yes, that's interesting, I'd like to know a little bit more, then they'll turn off. I've certainly done that looking at the insights that I get in my mobile banking apps. And that's why when we went with a selection of data, we tried to really limit it to the sorts of things that, a very small selection we thought people would be really interested in. And we landed on, new versus returning customers. We landed on things like sort of a heat map of patterns of business, but we kept it really simple.
I think that's really important, because one thing that came up at those of you that watched the last panel will have seen a common mistake was not having that endpoint and just saying, well, we can get all this data, we've used this technology, it's amazing, but not having a specific question of what do I want to find out. And that brings us on to the fintechs, I suppose. They've got all this impressive technology, they don't maybe have those years of data behind them, but they're still kind of maybe just telling us how many coffees we bought and things like that. So Peter, do you agree with that? And do you think that fintechs could be answering better questions with their data and analytics?
Okay, if you talk about data and data intelligence, you need two things. You need technology and you need the data itself. Today, most of the fintechs lacking the data lake or the big data environment to make very careful and very detailed decisions. But over time, they will do it. You have already let's say, I call it almost incumbent fintechs like a Revolut and a Starling, who are getting a mass of customers, and they can already very good target certain areas. For most of the fintechs, the data is not big enough to make real patterns, but the potential with them is big. And as an incumbent bank, I think it's a big potential even to look at them and see what they do with this technology and how they act on it. And if a traditional bank can learn this, how they do that, then they can be the fintech of tomorrow.
It's really interesting. And I'd like to ask both of you, I suppose, what are some of the interesting things that you've seen when it comes to using data to understand customers and actually increase customer satisfaction? Jonathan, you talked a lot about what you don't want to see, but what have you seen that you do want to see?
So I guess my problem statement is there's this gap between insight and experience. And as a small business person, I have a ton of experience, but that insight isn't helpful to me. So I really like what, for instance, RBC in Canada is doing. They've got a product called Insight Edge, where a lot of the analytics that they've done are things that other people are doing elsewhere, around, that comes out of issuing and acquiring data, it comes out of competitor patterns, it looks at market trends, and it's able to tell merchants about, what do their customers want, what's happening with in their markets, how do they improve loyalty, things like where should you put another store. So it's a nice product, it's done well, but the genius part of it, and this is where I think many people have heard me talk about tech and touch, is that product is put in the hands of their retail specialists, and it's then their retail specialists who work with their customers to bring that to life and to help them understand how it can improve their business. So I love that, because it's it's kind of an old world solution to a new problem. It's people talk to people understand people, and so the idea that you can bridge this gap between insight and experience by putting another person in there, I think is brilliant. And this is where so I completely agree with what Peter just said. It's really rich, deep data. It's the right technology. But it's also having the ability to build those relationships around it And if you're a big bank, and if you've got the distribution networks and you've got those advisor networks, I think using them in that tech and touch type way is, something again that plays back to the assets of banks. We love to bash banks, but Pollinate partners entirely with banks because we believe they have incredible assets, they have an incredible brand. When they really mobilize around something, they can do it really well. So that's, and there's lots of other examples, but I'm just going to pick that one out because I think it really speaks to that problem statement.
Definitely. Peter, what are you seeing when it comes to, using that data to really understand customers and make a difference to their journey?
There are two ways. I know my colleague is more in the merchant space, and I'm doing a number of big merchants too, but I want to more go to the cardholder space, people that have cards. And there it's even much easier to find spending behavior. For example, you give a prepaid card or a debit card to someone, and we'll give a very, very, very basic example. You see that the spending of this person is abroad, is in T&E. So then you can very easily transform him to a credit card because he's traveling, he is abroad, and so on. So a lot of these things are capable or able to handle. Also, if you see that people are having, for example, huge turnover with the cards, to get them into investment banking if you tomorrow do this. So with it, and these are the easy patterns that you can go much more deeper in that and much more detailed in this behavior. I worked 2 years ago on a very basic program where when the people went to the ATM, they would just discover their birth date, and when they were at the ATM on their birth date, then they got, maybe they got a voucher for McDonald's. It was a huge success. It was just a basic thing, and this is not, you don't need even AI for it, but it is how you play with data and the knowledge of data to improve your customer loyalty. And I think that's one of the most important things today is get your customers loyal to you and keep them with you, because the competition is only one website away.
Definitely. I think especially with the ease of switching, as you say, the loyalty space is something that hasn't been touched in a few years, maybe as much, but it's now kind of starting to develop as well. And I've seen a lot of interesting tech things on there. Jonathan, do you have anything to add onto that?
So something I'm getting quite excited about at the moment is this idea of adaptive dashboards. So we talked about presenting data back. We've talked about kind of that gap between so I've just got some data. Why am I interested in it? And if I take a step back, my email inbox, like everyone, is just full of spam. And full of things that I've subscribed to or forgotten to unsubscribe to. But I've set up a bunch of alerts on things like eBay. So I'm a watch collector. I buy far too many watches, and so I've got all these alerts on eBay and a sale room. And when one of those pops into my inbox, I always look at it. I try to look at it before anything else, just in case I miss out on something. And so it's the idea that strikes me from that is if you want to cut through the noise, find out what your customer or find out what your target is really interested in. I talked a little while ago about the banks try to tell me about me. I want them to tell me about things I'm interested in. So this idea of adaptive dashboards that understand, well, they don't really, but I think the audience already knows what I mean. They know where you click. They understand what you look at. They understand where you deep dive. And as they learn what you, as a consumer or you as a merchant, are interested in, then they evolve to present different data. They present data in a different way. Or the first thing they show you is actually the thing that you have clicked on 3 times in the past. And so that idea of taking signals from someone, so whether it's the alerts that I've set up, which is a very explicit signal, or it's where I click on a dashboard to understand more, which is a more implicit signal, taking those signals and tailoring what I see, and particularly I'm thinking about data and insights, tailoring that to what I'm interested in. That I think is really exciting, and that's where I think some of this technology and some of these kind of beautiful interfaces that we talk a lot about, that's where they really come alive.
I think that's really interesting. And as someone who is single but has just reached some sort of age where everyone is sending me adverts for nappies and baby formula and things, I think it's very very timely to talk about that. So I relate to it, and I would love for them to understand me a bit better, perhaps. But what I want to talk about is kind of marrying these two things together. We've talked about these banks that have data that they've built up over decades and those relationships with customers. We talked about fintechs who have these really clever ways of getting insights. So the key, I guess, is partnership. Peter, what do you think the answer is there, and how should all these organizations be partnering to make the most of what they have?
I think in today's world, it's not possible to work without partnerships in a kind of ecosystem way. I started in payments in 1995 when I was 2 years old. So I was quite early. But then you had these massive organizations who said, we can solve your issue. Today, solving an issue means collaboration between parties. Today, it's your partner, tomorrow it's your competitor. And in practice, that's what's happening. But if you want to deliver this really increased experience for your customers, and we are also a B2B brand, and our customers are the banks and the fintechs. So if you want to deliver that, you need partnerships around you. You can build everything yourself if you have enough IT guys. But it's not only building with IT guys, it's also having the knowledge to interpret what you build and to give advisory services technologically to that. So in our business, we are in 60–70% of the cases of the projects that we go in with partners. And we are part of the solution, but at the end, you deliver the complete solution in partnership. And I think that's for the banks in general a new way of doing for themselves, because they're not used to work with others. But also, if they launch RFPs today, they see, oh, but you're not doing this alone. You have partners for that, and you have other people. And how do we manage this, and so on. So I think if you can create this mindset, that is today the best way to go forward.
And Jonathan, as a B2B to B2C, how does that partnership work, and what makes a good partner?
So I'm going to use a word that I work very closely with Mike Elliff, who's the CEO of Till by NatWest. And we talk a lot about empathy, and particularly in the situation of being a fintech working with a bank, or in Mike's case, a bank trying to work with a fintech. That partnership, and I completely agree with what Peter just said. The partnership is absolutely key to it, but you do have to work quite hard to make it work. And I think, a lot of that actually is about a real empathy for, what are your partners working with? What are the challenges that they are wrestling with? So, a couple of sort of relatively self-evident examples, when within a bank, their regulatory cycles, their sign-offs, the things that they need to do to get everything through their policy are much more than what we as a nimble fintech would want. So we have to be empathetic with our banks and our partners and our friends and colleagues within each bank. Equally, we are trying to work with multiple banks all at the same time, building and designing a Commonwealth system And so I asked Mike for empathy when we're being asked for something and and being asked to build something. We say, well, we're having to do this over here and that over there and this slightly differently, and help me fit it all back together. And so I think that's partnership I think is fundamental, but more and more I like to use the word empathy, because when you really understand what it is your partner is wrestling with, I think it makes you a better partner.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. And it also probably helps manage those expectations when things are going to take a long time to go through in a bank, perhaps. And you also understand that for a fintech, 6 months feels like about 6 years. So I think that's a really key point as well. So I think that's around all we have time for. I just want to say massive thank you to both Peter and Jonathan for the conversation, and thanks to everyone for listening. And we're now going to move on to the kind of networking portion of the event, which I think really worth sticking around for, as it's kind of a unique way here on Balloon to actually talk to each other, and we've introduced some topics I'm sure you guys will want to discuss further. You can see on the network tab, which is on the left hand side, which is live now, you'll be taken to two options. There's cocktail tables, there's also instant networking. I would really recommend the instant networking function. I think that's what most people are going to use. And I'm just going to swap my cup of tea for my glass of wine that I have right here. And I hope that all of you will do the same if you haven't already, obviously time zones dependent. So yeah, just massive thank you to Peter and Jonathan, and I hope everyone enjoys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye. Bye.